Imagination! Imagination!
Are you gonna take us somewhere or not?
You know, maybe next time we should save ourselves the trouble and just go to the bar instead. I'm pretty sure the booze would be able to let us tap into our imagination a lot more efficiently than this show.
So, Star Twinkle Precure has come and gone, and based on the comment section, I'm sure a lot of you are breathing a loud sigh of relief. Me though.
Much like the past few years, I have to let out a sigh of frustration, and possibly my biggest one ever since I started these weekly Precure reviews.
Because, here's the thing, I've been on a bit of a sci-fi anime buzz ever since I finished Steins Gate and rewatched some old favorites. And while this hasn't been the first time outer space has played a significant role in a Precure series, it was going to be one where they would have had a whole season to explore it. And yet, even though there were significantly more episodes off of Earth, it almost feels like they never even left the atmosphere as far as their ideas and concepts went. I mean, the characters had no real in-story limitations as they had their own personal rocket ship that never seemed to need refueling, and a fairy mascot with Doctor Strange-level portal creation abilities. And yet, in spite of some legitimate flashes of brilliance here and there, how did they make it feel so mundane in the end? How could they let the literally limitless possibilities of the universe go to waste like this?
It's a toy production. You honestly think there aren't going to be any problems behind the scenes?
I think there was a lot of miscommunication and or people just going into business for themselves, leading to some outright chaotic disorganization in the writer's room. All of it being mismanaged by the greed of a certain company, leading to a very disjointed final product to say the least.
Thus, let's really break down when and where exactly the imagination just seemed to fade away in this overview of quite possibly the most tragic series in the franchise, Star Twinkle Precure.
For this year, I'm going to put a little less emphasis on specific arcs and episodes, as I do think many of this show's positive and negative aspects should be looked at from a wider lens, plus there's a lot of behind-the-scenes details I want to examine first.
First, let's take a look at admittedly one of the more minor details, though I do think it contributed significantly to the show's decline, the voice acting.
I usually don't bring this up much, since most Precure shows do have some solid casts, and this show certainly had a good mixture of vets and up-and-comers. However, there was one little red, or in this case, pink dot on this white dress that ended up throwing everything off.
From what I've read, and can just plain see in interviews, Hikaru Hoshina is heavily based off of her voice actress Amy Narase in terms of both design and personality.
Narase, for those unaware, is a member of the idol group Denpagumi Incorporated, and this, in my opinion, was a big mistake.
Because here's the funny thing about acting. Normally, you kind of want your actors to take on a personality different than their normal one.
Now, of course, that's not to say actors can never bring their own personalities into the role, or even play someone close to their real-life persona, but generally they should do that after they've built up their skill set so that they can more properly project an exaggerated version of their normal persona.
I think Chris Jericho put it best after he put in his years.
The best characters are your real persona turned up to 10.
In the case of Narase, she was, and kind of still is, very green to this whole voice acting thing. And how could she not be when she was essentially told to be herself for many recording sessions? Thus, ironically, her performances often came off more inorganic than anything else, as she never really played a character. While Narase might become a good actor on down the line, she wasn't going to become one in this role. Still, they went all in with this idea of a very idol as Precure because someone at Toei really thought it would be a great idea to try and tap into that market.
Not realizing that, one, idols are kind of passé these days. I mean, we're making parodies of them with zombies and Yakuza for crying out loud.
And two, this show is not Aikatsu. The Precure are not idols, no matter how much Toei wants to portray them as such outside of the actual show and plot. And before anyone brings up Urara and Makoto, they made it clear that being an idol was their day job, and in Makoto's case, she maintained a significantly different personality as a Precure. Thus, even though Kanako Miyamoto wasn't the greatest actress when she started, she was able to build up her skills enough that she could become a Precure acting as an idol and not the other way around.
I brought all this up because not only did it force the writers to have to write around the fact that they had to make this character based off of a real life person, but I think it also happened to breed a sort of apathy towards writing for this character amongst the secondary writers. I remind you, the main character of this show.
Outside of head writer Isao Murayama, hardly any secondary writers wrote episodes focused on her, with I think like only 2 or 3 Hikaru-focused episodes written by them. And even then, one of them was hijacked by Lala, who does have a much better actress in my opinion in Konomi Kohara.
Hard to believe she's still relatively new to voice acting.
And that scene conveniently leads into my next issue, and probably what ultimately sank this series, the severe lack of communication amongst all of the writers. And I think this more than likely had to do with the highly unbalanced mix they had going on. While they had relatively long-time Precure writers like the aforementioned Isao Murayama, Mitsutaka Hirota, and Jin Tanaka for one episode and the movie, they also had the very rusty pair of Yuka Yamada and Yuji Kobayashi, both having Smile as their most recent Precure writing credits before this show, and Miharu Hirami, who had absolutely no experience writing for Precure. Now granted, none of these writers are at all inexperienced when it comes to writing for magical girls, but the thing is, Precure, and in particular a series headed by Murayama, follow a very precise vision unlike many others in the genre. Thus, when you have writers with so many varying degrees of familiarity with the franchise, you're pretty much asking for a Hell's Kitchen situation.
And here I thought Kira had too many cooks in the kitchen, because, food puns and all that. But this show, it has that problem times however many characters appeared in that one Adult Swim short.
Then again, it might not be a one-to-one comparison, as Murayama doesn't seem to command as much authority as Gordon Ramsay. Of all the secondary writers, he only really seemed to confide with, or at the very least share similar visions with Hirami and Tanaka, who both at least tried to maintain a strong connection to the sci-fi theme, and give even character development to everyone. As for the rest of the writers' room, they seemed either lost or worse, tried to do their own thing. With Kobayashi, while he did write some good episodes, including arguably one of the best of the series, he also made some very questionable story choices, in particular regarding Elena, more on that when we get to characters. Hirami, due to her inexperience with the franchise, tends to write largely inoffensive, but also very middle of the road, kind of boring filler episodes.
And then there was Yamada.
While some writers seem to favor certain characters over others, I think Hirami and Kobayashi favored Madoka and Elena respectively, they at least kept their preferences in check. Not so much the case with Yuka Yamada and clearly her favorite character, Lala.
Now, while I can totally understand liking Lala, I mean, there's a reason she's in the top 10, the fact is, she was always going to have a good share of focus episodes, so why hijack other characters?
I already mentioned her taking one of Hikaru's episodes, but before that, she also took what should have been a very significant episode for Elena away from her. I think she was eventually reined in, but by that time the damage had already been done. I get the feeling that the only reason she was brought in and given such free range was because she wrote for Aikatsu, remember that whole idol thing I mentioned, and for the Battle Spirits card game anime franchise, again more on that in just a bit.
And as if the writers were more chaotic enough, I get the feeling that there was one more voice that really seemed to hamper any sort of visions everyone else might have had. That being the voice of the higher-ups.
This is just my own conspiracy theory, so take it with a heavy grain of salt, but I do think the toy execs ended up hastening the acquisitions of many of the star pens for the purposes of being able to sell them quicker. Because of this, they ended up streamlining their plot significance to the point that they didn't really feel all that important by the end. I mean, sure, the characters played up their importance, but to us, the audience, they just felt like another fetch quest item. They just really didn't seem to add anything new to the arsenals of either side of the conflict. The star pen attacks seldom looked significantly different than the Precure's base attacks and seemed only slightly more powerful. And while I-1 was able to use them to make monsters of the week, they never looked all that strong and were pretty much like any other Precure monster of the week from any other series. And on top of that, they were pretty much replaced in the latter half of the series. In the end, while they certainly managed to make good revenue in the short term by introducing the pen sooner rather than later, they ended up causing some long-term damage to the show itself.
Say, remember how I brought up Battle Spirits earlier in this video, as well as in my episode 46 review? Well, funny thing, that franchise also had a season where there was a fetch quest for representations of the 12 Zodiac, and it was pretty damn awesome.
In fact, quick recommendation, if you ever want to see a really good card game anime that blows Yu-Gi-Oh! Out of the water, go watch Battle Spirits Geki Hadan and its direct sequel, Brave. In that latter series, they had both the protagonist and antagonist trying to retrieve cards called the 12 Zodiac X Rares. And sure enough, unlike a certain other anime and its MacGuffins, they managed to make these little pieces of paper feel really important as a means of saving the world and gave each of them unique and interesting abilities. The fact that both the heroes and villains were able to use them made for some really gripping battles, which this show could have had if they actually featured the Dark Pens more prominently and gave them abilities beyond just making really boring monsters of the week. Heck, why didn't they go through with that whole corrupting the princesses subplot from episode 11?
I guess they figured since they had Yuka Yamada on their writing team, she would be able to work the same magic she did for those shows, ignoring the fact that she wasn't even the head writer of any Battle Spirits anime.
Now granted, being a part of a card game, they were afforded the freedom to give the 12 Zodiac X Rares whatever abilities they wanted within the boundaries of the game's meta at the time.
But then you look at the movie, and then you realize what they really could have done with these things.
I really do think these forms would fit in nicely in the show as their true final forms. After all, we have seen powered up forms like these make early bird appearances in Precure films in the past. And wouldn't it have just made sense to have them fight the Ophiuchus armors in these dresses?
But then I guess it would become kind of redundant with the Twinkle forms, which did take priority. After all, just look at this poster with Fua in it, and she's not in her pony form? Wait, is that thing for real?
Okay, so they revised the poster later, but there's also a lot of early images with Cotton Ball Fua instead of Pony Fua.
Did they rush through the pen collection art just to sell them quicker, as well as this monstrosity?
Okay, that's it. All bets are off. I am convinced that the Constellation dresses were originally going to be in the main show, but were scrapped by the toy execs in favor of the Twinkle style forms and this easier to manufacture plushie that they believed would sell better.
So, let me get this straight. They sacrificed the delicate pace of a show like this, likely forced Murayama to make a ton of rewrites to his original script, leading to even more discourse in the writer's room, all because they were more concerned with their bottom line. And you wanna know the funniest thing? It didn't work.
From Princess to Hugtoad, the toy sales for the July to September summer quarter sales always saw an increase over the April to June spring quarter. This year, however, it saw a decrease. The deluxe Takifua that was released at the end of August was a flop, as even my friend in Japan can attest to them collecting dust on the shelves.
You know, I could have mentioned episode 18 a little earlier.
You know, it was that one episode where Hikaru's mother tried to write a high-concept manga, but ended up having much of its sci-fi and fantasy elements gutted by her editor in favor of what he thought would sell, and ultimately didn't.
By that point in the series, Yuji Kobayashi realized exactly what he had signed up for at D&T.
But yes, with most of the messy behind-the-scenes details and theories out of the way for now, let's finally address the folk package that we actually did get.
After all, this could turn out to be a case of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, right? Well, in some ways, I guess it was.
Alright, since I've been ragging on this series for the most part throughout this video, let's take a minute to address some of the actually good elements of this show's plot. That being the fact that a lot of the stuff before the Fu Apocalypse was pretty good. We got proper introductions to our characters, they went to at least a few interesting alien worlds, they actually lost fights, yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, and Uni's introduction and backstory effectively raised the stakes and made the conflict feel that much grander. It wasn't perfect by any means, the animation quality would often dip significantly, and as I mentioned, they dropped the ball with Elena's early development.
But hey, maybe they could stick the landing in the latter half of the series. Spoilers, they didn't.
Yes, once the cotton ball evolved into an MLP reject, that to me was the show's point of no return.
You know, recently I watched a video by the TokuCast, a really good tokusatsu channel by the way, where they talked about how toy shows tend to lose a lot of their steam as their episodes enter into the 30s.
Due to poor planning, they tend to spin their wheels as they wait before they reach the climax of the series. Precure in recent years has suffered from the very same problem, and if my Deluxe Talking Fool plushie theory is correct, they only really have themselves to blame. Because as if making the Star Pens look like one of the weakest sets of power-ups ever weren't being enough, the princesses gave them another fetch quest they needed to complete before they could fight Ganondorf. I mean, save the universe, whatever. Because of this, plot points that were introduced in the former half of the series received little spotlight or were outright forgotten, most notably the Mr. Kaguya and G-Men subplot. They received so little focus that I think even Murayama had to throw in the towel on them and just dropped it off screen. Also, did anyone else forget that Yuri was an idol at one point? Because I sure as heck did.
Needless to say, in spite of a few interesting moments here and there, like pretty much everything having to do with the Ophiuchus Princess, and the fact that this series didn't have all that many plot holes compared to other series, I gotta say, many of its resolutions were just underwhelming.
This was unfortunately compounded by the show's inability to pick a single tone. Early on, it was established how truly grave the situation was, with whole planets and stars disappearing.
And unless you're dealing with this guy and his ability to just seal things away, then you're looking at potentially countless collateral casualties every second.
Balancing out those gravitational pulls ain't an easy job, we'll tell you that much.
Because of this, you'd think this would make things a little more dramatic and that our heroines would take their jobs a little more seriously, and yet because of the aforementioned rotating writer's room, the tone, especially for a situation like this, never really felt all that consistent.
I'll get more into this near the end, as I have a lot more to say.
With that, let's finally cover the biggest elephant in the room, the characters of this show. As usual, we'll start things off with the antagonists, which I do actually have mostly good stuff to say about them, starting with Darkness, aka the Ophiuchus Princess, who, yeah, was a pretty great final boss. Not so much an interesting overarching villainess, as for much of the series, she was just in her Serpenter cosplay and came off as robotic as her LCD face. Still, points her having a good endgame, awesome designs, and treating her lackeys well until her sudden and inevitable betrayal. It showed that she was at least smarter than the average villain by keeping all of her guys in check, and even her motivations, while still very much outright evil and sociopathic, were still understandable, as even the show illustrated how her concerns over warped imaginations damaging the universe were actually plausible. Though I still think Zazie rocks the snake look better. As for her subordinates, they're much more of a mixed bag. While I liked his backstory and dedication, I also found Gallagher to be a total bore, not helped by the fact that he was the biggest jobber of the villains, having 0 actual wins over the course of the entire series. I mean, sure, his comrades had more total losses than him, but at least there wasn't a whole lot of pointless build-up to their arrival, and they technically do have a collective victory over the Precure. As a result, it was hard to get invested in this guy, as legit tragic as his backstory was.
Jeez, changing scripts on the fly and poor bookings of the antagonist, Toei really has become the WWE of anime, hasn't it? And this is why people are switching over to AEW.
Tenjo fared a little better. I mean, at least she had a more relatable backstory in essentially being body-shamed by her entire planet and their standards of beauty and class. As a result, she did at least exhibit a little more personality near the climax of the series. I guess you could say her dressing in nothing but a leotard was a way of masking her insecurities over her small nose. But it also would have been nice to get at least a little more foreshadowing to the nostril reveal. I guess they also tried to hide this as a big twist by having her use that disguise pearl in that one episode, even though from a practical standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense when she could have just have changed her clothes. But yeah, speaking of that episode, it at least did a good job revealing that behind her haughty dominatrix attitude was an insecure lady who had become no better than her former tormentors. On a side note, it would have been really nice to see these SOBs at least get their karmic payback. Moving on to the villains with the best arcs, we start off with I-1, a character who, myself and many others, couldn't stand for her stereotypical vapid valley girl characteristics. Heck, she didn't even have all that interesting of a backstory as she was basically just a runaway. However, she made up for it by having some of the most character development in the entire show. After losing her closest confidant in Bakugan, we saw her go through a progressive mental breakdown. For her, even when her experiments failed, she was able to achieve some degree of success out of them. Thus, when things really didn't go her way through Bakugan/Uni's betrayal, she couldn't handle it and felt like she had just gone back to the days when she was a runaway with nothing to call her own. The rivalry between the Cyclops and the Catgirl was one of the most interesting storylines the show had going, though it was sadly cut short, possibly because of the aforementioned new fetch quest taking priority. I get the distinct feeling that they were supposed to do a lot more with the OG Bakugan, otherwise why just have this guy? Still, at least she was able to level out and become a lot more likable and possibly the most sane character in this entire show. Not too bad for a valley girl mad scientist. God, that's a weird combo.
Though I could have gone without this.
Finally, let's get to statistically the most popular baddie in the show, Capard. Not only was he the most charismatic villain by a mile, even making male power boldness look good, he also had one of the, sadly, most timeless of backstories. Coming from an aquatic planet that had its most significant resource literally sucked away by outsiders is a problem that sadly will never go away as long as life exists, as the Ophiuchus Princess herself can attest. It helped that he hinted at his dark past a lot earlier than his comrades. Thus, we could interpret his eccentric Chunibyo personality as a coping mechanism, kind of like Tenjo's, though he's not emulating his tormentors.
A more direct example would be another pretty boy villain, Wolfrun, who also seemed to have a lot of insecurities of his own.
In the end, he was one of the characters, hero or villain, with the most consistent arc. Just showing enough of a darker past that we could put two and two together with, and yet we could still appreciate him as a villain.
So overall, I did end up liking the villains, and even those who I didn't care for at first did get better by the end, which is a lot more than I could say about the average Precure villain faction. In fact, in some ways, they became more likable than the protagonists, which is a bit of a problem, isn't it?
While side characters are seldom all that important to a Precure series, this show still had one of the weaker casts due to having way too many characters. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about just the 12 Zodiac princesses, as they could at least be considered as one collective character. I'm talking more about the fact that there were so many different factions. We had the princesses, Abraham, Mr. Kaguya and the G-Men, the Hoshizora Alliance, and a ton of one-off characters.
Murayama, I know you like world building and all that, but don't you think this is a little much? Just saying.
As a result, it just made the show's overarching plot feel incredibly clunky with so many different characters and plot lines being juggled and dropped like crazy. I already went over how the G-Men subplot felt wasted, but the princesses especially felt completely underutilized.
As I said in my episode 47 review, I actually like the idea of treating these characters like the Greek gods, and that we lowly mortals were caught in the middle of their stupid conflict. So, why not play off of that and portray these characters in a bit more of a morally gray area?
But nope, after this reveal that included the fact that they purposely wanted to dump all of their responsibilities in protecting the entire universe on a team of preteen girls, they were treated as the big goods of this series. Even though when you get right down to it, they weren't that much better than the Space Bunnies. But I guess if they pointed out that little detail, they wouldn't be able to sell their stupid pens that don't even actually write.
Figures that the leader of them would be the cash cow of a different franchise.
Moving on to the main side characters, I'll at least admit this. Prunsu and the AI were pretty cool. The former was one of the most competent fairy mascots ever, not only providing necessary exposition, but on more than one occasion outright rescuing the heroines rather than the other way around. Likewise, while she understandably didn't have that much personality, Lala's AI came off as likable enough and did seem to form a subtle motherly bond with her master. Unfortunately, neither character got a ton of development. Prutsu was sadly another victim of the writer's room constantly changing things up, including his love interest, but he was cute and funny enough, even when he ended up looking like a Pixar reject.
There is one more main supporting character, but let's save talking about her for a little bit later, as she did leave one of the most significant impacts on this show, and not in the best of ways.
Finally, moving on to our main characters, we start off with the Sixth Ranger, and to be fair, Uni was a very interesting character initially. As a Phantom Thief moonlighting as a galactic pop owl, she added an interesting little wrinkle to the conflict before things got a little too crowded. Yeah, understandably, after joining the team, she mostly dropped the Phantom Thief thing, except for one episode, as to not overcomplicate things. Though she also didn't contribute much of anything after her great intro arc that saw her being forced to confront her Survivors Guild and being pulled by the show's two main conflicting factions.
I get that her character is supposed to be the sort of lone wolf archetype, or can in this case, but I think they overdid it.
Her only major contribution to the show, aside from getting Fua high, was her rivalry with I-1, which again felt like it was kind of cut short with her just forgiving her for the near genocide of her entire planet. I mean, I'm not against I-1 pulling a face turn, but where did this come from? It might have helped if they actually had her acknowledge her phantom thieving ways weren't exactly all that morally upright either, kind of making that whole we're not that much different thing ring a little bit truer. But they kind of missed that boat when Hikaru excused her actions in episode 27. I think they tried to course correct in the movie tie-in episode by having Hikaru suddenly changing her opinion.
Seriously, what was going on in the writer's room?
It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times. You stupid monkey.
I'll admit, I enjoyed Yuri for the most part, especially when she was a total meme troll, but I think they really missed the mark when trying to capitalize on the initial momentum of her intro arc through inconsistencies likely brought upon by the writers not being able to agree on what direction to take the character. In the end, the writing for Uni became even more ambiguous than her morality.
Moving on, let's take a look at Toei's painfully obvious attempt at trying to capitalize on a different franchise success before scoring the real deal with Madoka Kaguya.
And it's sad to say, that's probably one of the most interesting aspects of this character. She occupied the unfortunately very common and cliche position of the student council president cure. Basically, the perfectionist and oftentimes the strict babysitter of her team. Now to be fair, these sorts of characters have been very popular in the past, but they also needed some sort of gimmick or quirk to make them interesting. And Madoka, initially, there's that word again, did have some interesting gimmicks, most notably being the daughter of a possible antagonist in the future that didn't really pan out except for maybe one episode at best.
One of her big arcs was growing out of being Daddy's little girl who had been living under his thumb for so long. Well, it's kind of hard to reinforce that when Daddy Dearest is absent from the series for huge chunks.
As a result, she just kind of defaulted to the very basics of her character archetype. And by the time her last Spotlight episode came with her Twinkle imagination awakening, and in spite of arguably having the best fight in the entire series, it felt incredibly hollow. The G-Man subplot had been dropped, without us even really learning why the heck they were looking for extraterrestrial life in the first place. That actually would have made her arc a little more interesting. But nope, apparently Madoka was taking her first steps towards independence and a government job under her Prime Minister daddy.
I think you guys kind of missed the mark there.
And let's keep the smile references rolling with Elena.
Okay, I'll admit, I'm exaggerating a little, as Elena's main arc didn't involve her family, at least not as much as now. No, her arc was a lot more complicated and hard to talk about, to the point that I'm not even sure if the writers really want to talk about it.
Yes, okay, let's get this out of the way. Elena is the first multinational main character Precure, and that's all well and good. Going by her profile, many were expecting her to address race issues, especially in an overly conservative country like Japan.
I, for one, could take or leave all this PC stuff, unless it involves Aquaman making mine and my mother's jobs a lot harder. But if Toei wants to tackle this sort of subject matter, then I say they can knock themselves out.
Heck, they tackled it pretty well in several episodes of Doremi with Momoko getting into some intense arguments defending her African-American friend. But apparently, almost 2 decades later, Toei forgot what they did back then and instead pulled their punches. In several of Elena's episodes, it felt like they were trying to, or at least wanted to tackle racism and or discrimination, but then either because they chickened out or wanted to give it to Lala instead, they didn't go all the way with it. 2 of her episodes pretty much told the exact same lesson: be sensitive to other people's culture, and while that's not a bad lesson in any way, that's also about as far as they went with the subject.
Again, I could care less about these subjects, just don't half-ass them, as they won't benefit the character's arc in any way.
And that's pretty much what happened with Elena. Because they never pulled the trigger, her character became somewhat stagnant with her just relearning the same lessons. I guess we learned more about her past and her anxieties over her race near the end of the series, but none of those events really changed her as a character, as her current self wasn't facing any sort of significant hardships over it. Honestly, I don't know if upping the racism in her arc would have been a benefit or detriment to it in the long run, but we've gotten more of a reaction than, oh, most of my racial identity anxieties were self-inflicted. Otherwise, everyone has been really nice to me, and I've been referred to as the son of my school, so life is actually pretty good.
I didn't learn anything.
By the end of the series, Lala became much more of an allegory for racism, which is fine for her since she is a literal alien and everything. But then, why even bother with Elena if that's going to be the case? It really does feel like they just wanted to have this character representing cultural diversity, and yet they didn't want to taint her and ended up making her a bit of a Mary Sue in the end.
This isn't trying to have your cake and eat it too, oh no. It's trying to eat the whole damn bakery.
Personally, I think it would have been better if they had just not even tried to tackle these issues and just let Elena be her own character who happened to be half Hispanic. Because when you try to satisfy everyone with this sort of non-committal writing, you end up satisfying almost no one.
However, maybe both of these girls just suffered from the fact that Isao Murayama wasn't committed to them from the very beginning.
In an article for Animage magazine, Murayama told an interviewer that he originally went to Toei with a concept similar to Mahoutsukai. In other words, a 2-member team and then later a 3rd member. They rejected it, likely because they didn't want to repeat a show that didn't make them that much money, which makes perfect sense from a business standpoint. So Murayama went back and haphazardly added in Madoka and Elena and then got the green light. He only really seemed to focus on the 3 characters who were in his initial drafts. I also wouldn't be surprised if he told Jin Tanaka he could write them out of most of the movie. Now, of course, I'm sure he gave the other writers outlines on how to approach the sun and the moon, but as we've already established, there was likely little to no organization amongst the secondary writers, with some even going rogue and trying to write for other characters instead. As a result, I think these 2 were just doomed to irrelevance from day one.
And I gotta feel kind of bad for Isao Murayama, as it seems like from the very beginning, the show was already kind of out of his hands. Though at the same time, he's not totally blameless either. Like, seriously, dude, I realize Mahoutskai's toys didn't sell all that well, but let it go and don't try and make a pseudo-remake.
While we're on the subject of Murayama, it's also worth bringing up a different interview they did for the Anime Times, where he did say he wanted to bring more diversity into Precure with Uni. Yeah, the one Precure whom outside of a single festival episode didn't really interact with any other Earthlings. Alright, to be fair, he did point out that her loner tendencies were supposed to reflect a fear of interacting with individuals from a different race, though personally I interpret that as her acting like a cat.
Oh well, at least they got mostly right with a different character.
There's little argument that Lala ended up becoming the breakout character of this series, and for good reason. She had the most consistent arc. Her big gimmick was that she was from a planet that had designated her as a legal adult by their standards. Though, as we'd later see, while she was certainly mature, there was a lot more that she could learn. In fact, her whole planet could learn a thing or two, as they had grown too over-reliant on their tech.
While I would argue it's a good thing that technology is going to allow the next generation to mature more quickly, I do like that Lala and her race represent a sort of cautionary tale of not taking this idea too far.
As the series went on, and she learned the values of actually maintaining meaningful relationships with others, unlike with her very estranged family, she also became less reliant on her AI as she started to take getting her hands dirty with her friends. Of course, she didn't completely discard her tech because, well, someone has to fly the ship. But it was clear that she had become a far more balanced person by the end of the series, who even managed to promote changes to her home planet. Most impressive of all was how she pretty much faced the most difficult challenges of her team when both her home planet and home away from home turned their backs to her. At times like these, it would have been understandable if she had just reverted back to the borderline shut-in she was back at the beginning of the series, but she managed to maintain her resolve and ultimately proved her worth as a Precure. Lala Hagoromo had easily one of the best fish out of water storylines we've ever seen in Precure.
So with that in mind, you would hope that they would be able to make the main star just as good, if not better, than her co-star.
Nope.
Yeah, just like with this series itself, we started this video with Hikaru, so we may as well end it with her, as in many ways she represents this show perfectly. Both claim to have endless imagination, and yet lack the presence and personality to actually make it interesting.
Let me ask you one thing. What should be the main purpose of a lead in any sort of superhero show, be it Precure, Super Sentai, or even Kamen Rider? They should be one of, if not the main driving force behind the plot. Hikaru Hoshina is mostly just a reactionary character, often falling behind everyone else and only becoming the leader when the plot demanded it.
While she was the trigger to many of the show's events, especially in the beginning, all of the preceding events often didn't really require her intervention, as much of the plot just sort of happened for them. The pendant would sound off, they go to a planet, get the pen, done. Oh, and maybe they'd also have a very spontaneous and often very poorly animated fight with the villains.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not even really going to dive into production value because this show was just so underwhelming in that category, and besides, I think one of my friends is working on a video of his own. Anyway, I digress.
For a leader, Hikaru had such a weak presence in this show that Murayama even wrote a whole episode about it, possibly trying to salvage the character, and possibly getting out his own frustrations. More on that in just a minute. It was a noble effort regardless, but you know, just because you point out the problem doesn't automatically fix it either. Of course, I think the biggest problem with all of this was how Hikaru's character never seemed to develop because of it. Though even when they had the perfect chance to do so, they didn't take it either.
I brought this question at the top of the video. When and where exactly did the imagination seem to start to fade away? Well, I think I can point to the exact moment.
After suffering their first and really significant loss, the Precure, and in particular Hikaru, had a great opportunity to learn from their mistakes, especially since a lot of it was her fault. And yet nobody, aside from the villains, bothered to point this out, and thus Hikaru basically learned nothing.
I know I keep bringing this up in my videos, but it's worth mentioning here. Mana Aida is not a Mary Sue.
As at least she was called out for her narrow-mindedness by both the villains and her own teammates. And she did suffer consequences for not listening to them. Here, Hikaru legit messes up, loses her star pen, but hey, everyone still thinks she's great and continues to say this throughout the series, and she even gets her pen back one episode later.
We hope you've enjoyed No Moral Theater.
And unfortunately, this pattern continued throughout the series, with it truly becoming solidified during the two-part beatdown of Yalogre. To me, this is the point where Hikaru and the show as a whole truly lost me, as by so easily defeating the second in command of the villains, who did bring up good points about her being short-sighted, it became clear to me that this character wasn't going to go through any significant growth.
For another good example, let's go back to Battle Spirits for a minute.
One of the best episodes of that series saw the main character, Dawn, lose to the big bad of the series, the Otherworld King. The most significant aspect of this fight was the fact that the king didn't overpower him or anything. In fact, he used an exact copy of his deck and many of the same cards throughout the fight. The big difference between the two being the fact that the king used better strategy and thought all of his plays out ahead of time, or in his own words, saw the bigger picture, as he, at one time, had been an ambitious hero just like Don, and still believed he was doing the right thing that would ultimately save the world through what some might view as tyranny, but he viewed as a necessary evil. Of course, they would defeat the king later, but this outright embarrassing and demoralizing defeat would follow Don into the next season, as the king was even proven kind of right when the world's governments outright betrayed them when they tried to negotiate with them through the peaceful diplomatic approach. Don would learn from all of these painful experiences, going from your typical shonen protagonist to a hardened warrior who sought to save everyone by any means necessary. Moments like this only really served to reaffirm Hikaru's narrow-minded views. She remained the same ball of caffeine throughout the series, never learning, and remained the same reckless fool who jumped out of a spaceship in the first episode.
We've seen this sort of protagonist in this franchise and in other anime more than enough already, and we're craving something else.
I think Nodoka is going to be an attempt at trying something different with Pink Lead, as she has a medical excuse why she can't be the Genki girl all the time. So, while I wouldn't call Hikaru the worst Pink Lead ever, I do think she will end up becoming one of the most forgettable ever for just not having that much to her.
Really though, a good chunk of this show about imagination all seem to suffer from the same issue, that our characters were just not given enough challenges to learn and grow from, aside from maybe Lala and kind of Uni, I guess.
Madoka didn't have her father to debate with for most of the series, Elena didn't really suffer any significant external racial issues, and Hikaru was never called out on her reckless behavior. They just breezed through most of their fights thanks to a certain Deus Ex Machina until the Ophiuchus Princess. And yet, even with the end of the universe facing them, it just didn't feel like that big a deal, as they hadn't really been challenged that much throughout the series. It really does feel like they weren't allowed to portray these characters in a harsh light, and I'm not saying that they needed to be overly dramatic or anything, but without enough challenges or stakes, the characters end up feeling too perfect, which is pretty much the death note for imagination.
そこに想像の余地はなく、それは知恵も才能も。
Though I guess part of the reason they were seldom given actual challenges was for the sake of propping this thing up. Yeah, don't think I forgot about this literally discounted alicorn.
Though even that might be too generous of a description, as there was really nothing that special about her. She was just another Deus Ex Machina baby with so many powers that she felt more like a cheat code than anything else, but lacked even the aesthetic cuteness, especially in her second form in my opinion. She also lacked the innocence of others like Hakutan and Latte so far, or actual personality like the other much better mascot of this season. Though the biggest thing that drove me up the wall about this character wasn't really her voice, because quite frankly, even if this wasn't her best performance, I like Hinakino's acting. Nor was it her neediness that much, it was the fact that the Star Twinkle team seemed to prioritize her safety over everything else, including the whole universe.
Fua and everyone, that's what she should have said.
But no, because they had to sell this toy, they had to glorify this character every chance they had, including with one of my least favorite finishers in the entire franchise. It only took the first line of this chant to make me despise it and call it a cult chant.
Really, I wouldn't be surprised if stuff like this wasn't even written by the actual writers, but by the toy execs who feared that their little plushie wouldn't sell, so they tried to make it more attractive.
And with that, I think I could sum up exactly why I view this as one of the most tragic Precure series ever. Early on, it stopped being something I think many of the creators could be proud of, as everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It had an imbalanced writing team that couldn't seem to agree on what direction to take the show, which resulted in many plot points being underdeveloped and dropped out of nowhere. Characters were changed or added in against the head writer's original scripts, which as a result of that, didn't garner the characters' attention that they needed to truly flesh them out. And many of these changes were made in the name of short-term gain for toy. I hope you guys are satisfied. Just by comparing this show with the movie and disregarding production values, we can gauge how much better it would have been if they had just gone with Murayama's original 2-3 Precure team idea. Nothing feels all that cluttered, Hikaru and Lala ended up developing an interesting chemistry, and there was plenty of time to go on a fun adventure when there was no extra behind the scenes baggage.
Between the Snyder cut and the JJ cut, maybe we should also throw the Murayama cut into the mix.
In the end, I do honestly believe that Star Twinkle could have been great. It had a fun concept, Lala was great regardless, and it had such an epic skill like near Gren Lagann sized. But it just seemed to be held back by a plethora of issues and bad choices that prevented it from reaching its full potential. Isao Murayama can be a good writer, but he needs to learn how to put his foot down and not let his secondary writers, and especially not Toei, run his show. Hopefully, with Healing Goods seeming to return to the basics, they'll be able to let the writers just do their thing. Because if we end up with another show created by Toei's warped imagination, then I'll officially side with the Ophiuchus Princess and just throw it all in a black hole.
Well, that went on longer than I originally expected, and I'm sure a lot of you guys disagree with certain points, and if you do, feel free to comment below and increase my channel's engagement. Also, be sure to keep up with my weekly Precure reviews, where I won't go more than half an hour complaining and bringing up my crazy conspiracy theories. No, I'll just try to condense it down to just 10 minutes. Anyway, farewell for now, my friends, and I think it's high time to put this back where it belongs.